Welcome to the July 28th edition of the PFF Forecast. This was an excellent podcast. We had Brad Spielberger on, who, if you're not familiar with Brad, he works at PFF. He's our cap expert, and that's an understatement. One of the most well-connected people actually out there, and just also understands football. He gets it. This was a great conversation. We talked about the Xavier Howard situation in Miami, where he might go, make some predictions there. We spend the bulk of the podcast talking about the Rodgers stuff, getting into what the actual concessions were, what's going to get written down, where we think he's going to end up playing, what he did to Brian Gutekunst and Mark Murphy, both in public and behind closed doors.
Stop.
And then we get into the Randall Cobb trade, and this was fascinating because it's a thing that probably people aren't talking enough about, but that was an awful trade. We talk about what maybe the Texans are doing / thinking, some conspiracy theories there. We hit some guys that might get extended going forward. It was a great conversation that he gives a great recommendation. I'm even forgetting a few things that we talked about. So let's rock. All right. It's a fun episode. I enjoyed having Brad on. He's someone that we got to get on a little more because we didn't even get a chance to talk betting with him.
Yeah, he comes from a great great group at Over the Cap. We got him. We were able to get him last year. And I think all he does is really just add to the things we can say intelligently, which is always so good. Even the discussion we had last week, I know I had a number of friends text about it and said the surplus value thing was an amazing discussion. And now it opened up the door of why we say things like, oh, the 8th best quarterback in the league is not worth it. And it's well, being able to describe that, these are things that Brad, has really helped us understand. And he also is really plugged in. He's also understands football and betting and stuff. The very valuable person and somebody that, is a great asset to us.
Couple of things before we get into it. The first thing is that I have to take a victory lap.
Well, on your bets. I mean, we all made these bets together.
No, it's not even about the bets. It's a victory lap on Adam Schefter, who I love. Adam Schefter's fucking awesome. But I'm 2-0 against Adam Schefter.
Okay. Well, no, you're 3-0, and here's why. Okay. We had Adam on the show.
Yeah. And
when you introduced him, you said author. And no one broke out laughing.
3-0.
3-0.
Because I've got Mac Jones, right? He came out and said it's Mac Jones. I said, look, it's not gonna be Mac Jones.
We were partially wrong there, but we were pragmatic in our movement towards Lance.
Yeah, well, we bet Lance handily. And then he was on Chris's podcast a couple weeks ago, and he said, look, I think retirement is
retirement was the second most likely thing given everything, right?
And so we'll talk about this with Brad.
Okay.
I just flat out reject that. But I'm taking it as a victory. Look, you got to take your victories where you can. I'm picking my spots, and I'm doing that in jest, of course. We're going to get to Brad in just a second. Before we do, I don't know if you guys have been living under a rock or not. Some people might be. There's the Delta variant going around. Who knows? But fantasy football is 100% here. And there's a multitude of things at pff.com to get you in a place to not embarrass yourself, dare I say even succeed. Just $9.99 a month, and you get PFF's fantasy football draft guide, which you can just download, our player rankings and projections, which are always updated to the minute, all of PFF's locked article content, which anything from draft strategy to who's going to be a sleeper that actually people aren't talking about because everyone talks about the same fucking sleepers every year.
The fantasy discourse right now.
It's amazing.
Makes me want to stab myself with a plunger.
So don't stab yourself with a plunger. Don't deal with the fantasy discourse. Come get your cheat sheets, all the fantasy stuff you need at pff.com. It's $9.99. I promise you, you will not regret it. By the way, you think we have great talent now? We're adding an exquisite fantasy analyst here in the next couple of weeks, so you will not want to miss out on that. And if you're playing fantasy, I should also say this. Fantrax is a great place for your league to choose your league manager. Multi-team trades, which I think is awesome, plus the player salary and contract options, which if you do a keeper league, you should do a keeper league if you don't. It's a ton of fun. It makes the league so much better. Go to fantrax.com/PFF and get a chance to win an autographed jersey by the one and only Josh Allen, quarterback of the Buffalo Bills. Fantrax.com/PFF.
Look at us, like Josh Allen being a part of this. Look at us now. Like right at this time last year,
I know.
We were having discussions with our friend Evan, our friend Ian, who we just hired at the time, about whether Josh Allen could throw it in the ocean. And now we're giving away a jersey.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Variance is a hell of a drug.
I don't know if have you noticed I'm in a good mood. A lot of levity.
Are you? Is this a Manscaped read?
So I've used now the lawnmower. I think it's 4.0 now. We're at okay. And I have a review to give.
Oh, okay.
A couple of things. And so people should know I'm not just like fucking doing this because of the read. Yeah. I'm actually doing this because I've used their products for like 4 years. And I had a couple of beefs.
You had the lawnmower 1.
I had the original fucking lawnmower. Okay. A couple of beefs. The first was the battery ran out quickly. They fixed that problem. They actually have a really slick charger. The charger used to suck. They now have a stand-up charger. It charges well, and the battery has lasted. I've tried it out. I've tested it out, and it's lasted a very long time. So that's great. Second thing is they have improved on the closeness of the cut, which is nice.
Nice.
And yet
seems like an important thing.
Important thing, and yet it actually feels safer.
Aspect of R&D.
It feels safer. So they've improved in like the 3 key areas of the whole thing. And actually one more. The battery tells you when it's getting low. It used to just not tell you. It used to go red. And then you're like sitting there and like.
You're like on the road and you're like, I didn't bring the charger.
Half your balls are shaved and you're like, fuck. Yeah, I got to plug it back in.
It's like the only time it's good to be Lance Armstrong.
Go to manscaped.com. Use the promo code PFF. Get 20% off and free shipping. I would not tell you to get it unless I use it myself. And I do. Now, Brad Spielberger. One of our favorite people to talk to, both on and off the air, Mr. Bradley Spielberger, the number 1, 2, and 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10 capologists that we have at PFF. He is the guy to go to in terms of contracts, writes a ton of great content on the site explaining a lot of that shit that no one understands.
George, by the way,
trade markets.
We got to stop using so many swear words, apparently. That's been a frequent, like...
from who?
The commenters.
You need to stop reading the fucking comments.
Look, folks, I tried.
This was the wrong day and night to bring that to my attention, yes. By the way. But Brad is joining us because there's a lot to unpack about what's happened over the past couple of days, honestly, but like the off season in general. Also a fellow bettor, and we appreciate that, Brad. So welcome, brother. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm looking forward to the rest of the summer. Got training camp kicking off, football about to get underway. Things are looking up.
We're going to talk about the Rodgers thing in a second, but like as you look at potential things that could happen, what are the things that haven't happened yet that you're like, this is going to happen? This is going to be like, these are kind of the big dominoes still to fall.
I think the biggest domino that I do now think is going to happen, and that changed yesterday, is the Xavier Howard situation. I do think he's going to get traded at this point. I thought him and Miami would be able to find a resolution as new agents, so I thought maybe he comes in, works with the Dolphins, they figure something out. I thought his requests were pretty reasonable. If it's true what he said in his post, he didn't want new money, just wanted more guarantees. Couldn't resolve it, and I think that could be a power shift. We heard from Rap Sheet today, Ian Rappaport, that 2 playoff teams have already called, so I think he could be a big cog in the rest of this offseason.
Who do you think those playoff teams are?
Great question. I wonder if, I know they just, and we'll get to it later, they just wasted a lot of money and capital on Randall Cobb, but I wonder if Green Bay maybe is in the mix. You could make a case that Kevin King lost them the playoff game against the Bucs last year. And yes, they drafted, a corner pretty early in Eric Stokes, but you never know the rookie corner, obviously. So I think maybe they could be one of those teams. Maybe the Saints, because they're crazy and they're in on every single deal.
Call everybody.
I don't know, play a lot of man coverage. Marshawn Lattimore facing a potential suspension. They're very thin at corner, so maybe them as well.
The Saints are the team.
They somehow got $11.3 million of cap space. I don't know where it came from.
The Saints are the guy in your friend group who literally sends a sup to every girl the second her relationship status goes to single.
So division is an issue, right? Because obviously the Jets would be a team that could use him. They need to sign
not a playoff team.
They need to sign their quarterback, which is tilting me. The Browns could be a team, although they seem like the kind of team, but I don't know they wouldn't give up the assets. I don't think that they're a ton of picks for veterans type team, although they did for Odell in a previous regime. Yeah, I mean, it's tricky.
Pittsburgh, maybe?
Yeah, Pittsburgh. I mean, they're sort of in that man coverage. I'm not actually sure where Howard the scheme fit for him would be. The Niners would be another one because where are they right now? They're at Mosley, Verrett.
Yeah.
Kind of on the outside.
Very different. I mean, that's a different scheme.
Yeah, certainly. But you can sort of. I mean, they're also switching.
Play anything.
Yeah, they're also switching defensive coordinators, so it's not necessarily they'll be tied to the Salah one. And the Niners right now, I said this to George just to tilt him. I think third best odds according to Pinnacle to win the Super Bowl right now.
Brad, you'd be shocked to find that worked.
So it's interesting. I do think Arizona continues to be a good spot. I do think if he wants more money, Jacksonville could also be a spot.
So last question on Howard, because he's a super valuable asset. I mean, he's a corner that has been one of the best corners at his peak, out there, right? Why would the Dolphins, if he's not asking for new money, be so hesitant to add guarantees to his deal?
A great question. And it generally comes down to just trying to maintain precedent, trying to think more about the next guy that's going to do this and not so much about the guy in the present. But I think when you look at the context of the offseason they've had, I mean, the first big storyline of the entire NFL offseason was them cutting Kyle Van Noy. He had $12.5 million in injury-only guaranteed money, and he wasn't injured, so he got none of that, obviously. And that's kind of a similar situation. And they spent a lot on non-draft picks, which Howard didn't like when they added Byron Jones. And they're also now cutting guys and trading guys. Shaq Lawson, they trade to NFL purgatory. They trade him to Houston. They're not really sticking by their guys. And I think at a certain point, yes, I think we overvalue locker room and culture and all that stuff. Yes, we do, and we don't, but some people do. Yeah. But at a certain point, I think you should consider, are we going to have an uprising in this locker room? I don't know why they can't figure it out. If it's true, all he wants is more guarantees. I would make that work.
But
they set the precedent by signing Byron Jones, a worse cornerback, to way more money.
But hold on, but
isn't that the precedent?
But no, going into last year, Byron Jones was considered a better player than Xavier Howard.
Okay, whatever. But considered a better player they're on a certain level.
Yeah. But I think Brad's point is an important one, and one that we've talked about a few times. But it's sort of so we used to talk to Zach, who used played quarterback in the NFL and at Oklahoma State, where he's one of the reasons you run the ball on 1st and 10 is to give the quarterback a mental break, right? You take a negative EV thing to have a positive global EV.
Right.
Locker room stuff is you watch the Rodgers press conference today. It clearly grated on him that they let Bulaga and Lindsley and
Jordy Nelson's
yeah. But and again, guys like us will say, yeah, but it's probably a sharp move. Every single move the Patriots made was probably pissed Brady off, right? And for the longest time, it was kind of yeah, who cares? You won 6 Super Bowls. Get over it. And then, but you clearly see Tom in Tampa Bay now sort of living his best life because he's got a team that's sort of throwing caution to the wind and doing whatever he wants. There may be, to Brad's point, there may be some value. And I don't know what that value is. I think it's probably overstated hugely, but there is some negative externality to making the positive EV move at every decision. I do think, because for me personally, I think Howard, I wouldn't trade for him because you're buying a corner off a 10 interception season.
Yeah, of
That's
course.
like never going to happen.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like the Rodgers situation in Green Bay too. You're buying a guy at MVP levels, right? Like, so the rational thing is to say, okay, take a hike. Like, you had a great season, go cash in, but we have a process here. But it does take a toll, doesn't it?
Yeah, I agree with it. The best thing you said there was that you wouldn't trade, like, if we were GMs, I don't think any of us is beating down the door to trade for Xavier Howard and then negotiate with him after trading for him after a 10 interception season.
Yeah, like, to me, it just seems like it seems silly unless you're Jacksonville, unless you have a ton of slack, right? Like,
I guess, but then again, like, why would you tie up money? Brad, what do you think? Do you think he gets traded?
Yeah, no, so I really do at this point. I think that not going to resolve itself. We've seen players before where a big issue is not being the highest paid player at their position on the roster. It had something to do with why Stephon Diggs is now a Buffalo Bill. We've seen it happen before, and I think that we have 4 years left on Xavier Howard's deal is an eternity for a 28-year-old corner. So I do think he gets moved, but I think, like you said, at the same time, other teams are looking at this like, hey, he's Dogecoin at 70 cents right now. Like, his value is literally at its absolute peak, and it's only trending downward. So, are you parting with a first-round pick? I don't think it's something that would be smart to do, because you're also then, going to give him a huge new contract when he gets there potentially. I do think it's moved, though. I think it's going to happen.
Yeah, that's why people go, oh my God, I can't believe a guy who just played so well got traded for a second, a third, a fourth-round pick. And it's like, there's a reason. Like, it's not just like these teams. So we give teams a hard time. But, like, there's a lot of situations where people just do not see the reasoning there, and that's certainly one. Let's talk about Rodgers here. I guess here's my biggest question, and there's going to be this conversation will go in many different directions. So it's not about the money. Comes back, right? Not about the money. Got to be very clear there. He's definitely done. By the way, my big takeaway was that my dude has tried some drugs this offseason. Okay? Like, if you watched anything about Aaron Rodgers over the offseason and this press conference, like, I would guess hallucinogenic drugs, LSD.
I mean, I just think, like, is it just like the sex a drug? Like, that he's
I think you're over exaggerating what that must be like. I'm gonna get so the way that I think of it is like he had his Steve Jobs, like, this is how I came up with all my brilliant ideas at Apple. I went and tried some LSD. But it's not about the money. It's about the leverage. And what I want is this team that is putting players to make my chance of winning a Super Bowl better. How do you contractually obligate that? Like, what is this going to look like? Is it going to be a piece of paper that no one ever sees that gets, like, locked in a safe unless he has to pull it out? What's the deal?
I don't think you can actually reduce to writing an agreement that they're going to do things he says. I think if you hadn't seen, like, I think this Randall Cobb trade really means a lot more than
think that was it?
They even realize. I think it's an awful trade. I also think it's more than, like, Brady has ever, in one move, I think it's honestly more than he's ever asked for, to take on a decent chunk of salary for a not good player, and at this point in his career, and give up a draft pick. But yeah, you can't reduce that to writing. But yeah, obviously at this point, the team is like, we'll do whatever it takes. I think it's the biggest indictment, and my biggest takeaway is Jordan Love must just look terrible in practice. Besides the takeaway that he's going to Joshua Tree with Miles Teller. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how you force a second move, another move. I don't think he can continue to go back to the well and say, now you have to do this, now you have to do that. I think you just pacify him. Just give him a call whenever you're going to do anything. Tell him your plans, tell him what you're thinking. Say, hey, what do you think about it? And then just ignore him and do what you want. But that's respect in some degree.
But isn't, like, the issue here, and this is very risky for Green Bay, I think, because the risk is going to be, and I don't think this is actually going to be the case, but let's. So Rodgers is on this player empowerment kick, which he has every right to. I think it's long-term good for the league. But if the Packers' lesson from this is to take care of your veteran players more and not, we should evaluate our quarterback's contract and our ability to get out of that contract before we trade picks for a quarterback in the back half of the first round to piss him off. then I think they're absolutely missing the mark here. The issue, Brad, right, is the fact that Rodgers' deal there was no outs. When was the earliest convenient out for the Aaron Rodgers deal?
Right, like it's still not convenient now, right? So yeah.
And we talk about like Favre Rodgers, like as if, because it is for them, and this is the same thing with the Steelers. For them, it's the last time they changed quarterbacks, but it's like a lifetime ago in the history of the NFL. Rodgers' contract in 2005 was 6 years, $7 million, and I understand like that you had 6 years of player control and a $1 million per season salary like that. There's no risk there almost. Whereas nowadays, you have 4 years and you have, after that third year, you're basically making a decision. Then you have the fifth year option, you're out, and the guy is actually making decent money after that. Mm-hmm. And like to not appreciate or understand that difference relative to what Rodgers, and to not understand your quarterback's mentality either, that draft pick is worse than any of the things they've done to Rodgers since.
Although he said in the press conference, this has nothing to do with the draft. Nothing to do with Jordan Love. It was interesting to me because here's the thing. This was so interesting to me. That was one of the most incredible press conferences ever. He literally took a shovel to Brian Gutekunst's skull and then buried him in the same 20 minutes and then did so with like 5 other, like regimes of Packer front offices and seemingly was just dead truthful. But the one thing I don't really agree with, there were 2 things that I thought he was maybe not telling the whole truth about. He said it had nothing to do with Love, nothing to do with the draft. Reason I think he said that is because he doesn't want to admit it, right? He doesn't want to admit that some rookie got under his skin. He also doesn't want to deal with that. Like, why would he need to deal with it? Like, I'm not saying
it's also not Jordan Love's fault.
Yeah, but I also think, like, I have no problem with him saying that. I'm just saying I don't totally believe him. And the second thing was he said, I really strongly contemplated retirement. And as I've talked about a lot on this podcast, I think maybe it entered his mind and he goes, oh yeah, I'm one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. Why would I just like stop playing football?
I also think the Jeopardy thing, A, didn't pay as well, and B, he wasn't necessarily even a finalist for it. Like I think all the things he tried, like the grass was not greener on the other side.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Hosting Jeopardy is amazing for like an average dude, for one of the best, the hardest things in the world. It ain't that great. But I want to get back to and have you answer this, Brad. So explain that a little bit more, what Eric said about the outs in the contract and how the new deal will change that in any way materially from either side.
New deal or raw deal?
Yeah, so, that's the thing when you push money down the road, we talk about the cap and the cap is fake and all that, but when you push money down the road, it just makes things very difficult. I mean, a different example really quickly, but next year, Matt Ryan will still have $40 million in dead money if the Falcons try to trade him before June 1st or if they cut him. Like, he's literally taking up a fifth of the salary cap in dead money next year. So when you do these things, and so Rodgers has been similar in recent years, and it makes it so that you can't move on. And so you kind of have to agree to what he asks, or as it happened this offseason, because he kind of knows you don't have a choice. So the new deal honestly is not going to make it easier, like financially or dead cap wise, to get him out of there. If anything, it's going to move money up and make it more challenging, which is also an interesting component of it. And I think they realize that at the end of the day, when you have a franchise quarterback, and more than that, when you have a top 10, top 5 quarterback of all time, what the Saints did is crazy, and we laughed about it either before the show or the top of the show or whatever. But when you have that guy, you probably just should do that, because unless you're the Packers, that doesn't happen. You don't get that twice in a row. You don't get that every year. And so it's almost like, yes, it is a scary sunk cost that is impossible to get around, and there's no outs unless you're willing to just eat 20%, 25% of the entire salary cap to a player not even on your roster. But at a certain point, like, who cares? Like, just if Rodgers moves on next year, just suck next year. Like, it doesn't really matter. You're not going to compete. And I know it's tough. I'm not saying tank or anything like that, but you're not going to be a contender next year. So what's the difference between having $40 million and $30 million in dead money? But yeah, when you have those sunk costs, it makes it hard to make moves.
Yeah, and that was what we saw with Atlanta in the draft, and sort of and I think you and I talked about this, Brad. It's sort of like the unlucky nature of what happened, where they do the Matt Ryan thing, and then like a week later, the 49ers trade for the third pick, and all of a sudden Justin Fields is in there, set of outcomes. And it's like, well, shoot, like that really did, because all of the edge with a rookie quarterback is the salary side. Right? And if that salary is having to play around with 40 million in dead money, then everybody's like, well, why didn't he work out? It's like, well, it's pretty simple to see why he didn't work out, because he didn't have the same advantages that every other rookie quarterback had. So again, I think if the Packers see this and say, okay, player empowerment's a big deal, we have to think about that a little bit more. Don't draft a quarterback when your guy is 2-3 years still before you can cut him. If those are the lessons, fine.
Or just have a conversation with them.
Yeah. If the lesson is, and that's right. And Kevin Cole did say this, which we talked about last time. Just view the draft pick as a lottery ticket in that case, right? Like, it is different to pick a guy at 4 versus picking a guy at 26 wherever where love came. Like, that actually is it. Like, if they just viewed it as, oh, this is a high second round pick, I'm pretty sure, like, if they just explained that to Rodgers that way, it's probably not a big deal.
They didn't even have a conversation.
But if the Packers take from this, we need to be the kumbaya, like, team that pays every player that ever does anything well for us to make everybody happy, it's going to not end well.
They're going to be bad. So, okay. So then I think the other expectation is that Rodgers gets out of this the ability to dictate where he goes next year. So there are two scenarios. The Packers win the Super Bowl, and I'm going to go ahead and say if they win the Super Bowl, I don't know, does anyone disagree? Like, if they win the Super Bowl, I think they're running it back. That would be
hard not to.
Yeah, that would be my guess. Okay, so the Packers don't win the Super Bowl. Does Rodgers, is he actually going to get out of this the ability to dictate where he plays football next year?
So my guess of what they're going to do is they are going to set it up to where, let's say after the season, it's before the 2022, the season begins for 2022 in mid-March or so. And I think the way they'll set it up is they'll say, okay, if Rodgers requests a trade and wants to get traded, I think he'll give them a list of teams he's unwilling to go to. It sounds like he's not going to get a no-trade clause, but I'm guessing he'd say, here's a list of teams that if you trade me there, I'll just call that GM and say, hey, I'm not going to show up, so you shouldn't send picks to Green Bay. So he'll give the veto list, and I think they're going to put a contract mechanism in where it says, okay, if he asks for a trade and we don't do it and he's still on our roster by X date, let's say June 2nd, for kind of a cap purpose, he's going to get a $50 million fully guaranteed roster bonus. And so it basically creates an ultimatum in the contract. It's not actually a poison pill. It's not actually saying, we have penalties or we have to trade him by this date, but it will force the issue and force them to do something. We saw something somewhat similar this offseason. The Eagles did it. The Eagles always figure out loopholes and find new ways to do everything. That's why they're, a great front office, even with the struggles, because they're just always finding edges. They basically did this with Alshon Jeffrey and Malik Jackson as a way to work with their contracts that benefited them, but then those guys knew they would be cut by a certain date and could hit free agency and sign with a new team immediately, which Malik Jackson did. Obviously, Alshon's still a free agent, but same thing. It was a $20 million fully guaranteed roster bonus if they were on the roster on March, I want to say 18th, like the second day of free agency. So same exact construct. If Rodgers says, we didn't win the Super Bowl and I want to go move out west and go, play in Denver or wherever, if you don't trade me by this date, you owe me literally, a half of $100 million fully guaranteed. And
so the idea is then that he will say, okay, I want to go to this team, work it out. And then they get to that point, let's say they can't reach a deal, and he goes, I do not, it doesn't even matter what he says. They have to cut him, basically.
Right. So that would yes, essentially be like, all right, well, then at this point, if that team is unwilling to cooperate or this list of teams won't give you anything. Yeah. And I think people keep saying, well, if the team knows there's this mechanism, then they're not going to offer a ransom. I think the thinking is, look, if you're the Broncos, the Raiders are probably going to call and they're on Rodgers. Yeah. The short list we've heard is the Raiders, the Broncos, and the 49ers. I think we can assume the Niners are now out. I guess we don't know. But if it's those two teams in the same division, from Green Bay's perspective, you're like, okay, well, hopefully they're bidding against each other and they can't sit on their hands and not make a move, or they're someone else will enter the fold and make an offer. But
that's
otherwise,
scary though.
You just have to cut him.
You're not going to get anything for him then, right? Because why would a team?
No, you need multiple suitors.
Why would a team give up a lot if like if you're the Broncos and you're talking to Rodgers and Rodgers is like, I want to come play for you, but like if we want to trade for you, we're gonna have to give up the players that can help you win a Super Bowl.
No, I hear you. Draft pick. I mean, I think you just say draft picks. You'd be like, look, if we have Aaron Rodgers in this roster and we don't lose any players off this roster, we're picking in the 25 or later anyways. You know, the Broncos specifically haven't made the playoff. They're in the second longest playoff drought in the NFL. I hear you, though. And I guess for Gruden, I'd be like, Gruden's going to be entering year 5 of his 10-year mega deal, hasn't done absolutely anything.
Yeah.
So there's pressure in that regard, I guess.
Yeah, and so this brings it back to like, we might see some crazy shit this season, right? Because like, I'm not saying they can't trade Rodgers, but if the Packers, like, let's say they start the season like 2-4 or something, 2-5, we get to the trade them, like they're in rebuild mode 100%, right?
2-6.
I mean, I'm not saying it's possible, but like the worst outcome for Green Bay is to basically slug it out for the division with one of the Vikings or the Bears, right? Because
yeah, but they're not. I don't think. I mean, look, they could go 0 heading into the trade deadline. I don't think that's happening. But like, what's the floor in their realm of possibilities heading into the trade deadline? What week is the trade deadline?
we have
Probably different this year.
Is it
yeah,
like
we
week
have
10?
we have the Packers. Like, I mean, we have the Packers floor at like 8 wins, like 90 to 10%. But if you think about it, again, Jair, right? They have Jair Alexander, who might end up getting signed anyway, right away. But like, you know what I'm saying? Like, if they get to a point where they're like Super Bowl or bust this
November
year,
2nd.
if it's anywhere close to bust, right?
Okay.
They're going to start selling off pieces, aren't they?
I think that's even more ridiculous than your retirement take for Aaron Rodgers. Which, by
Wait
the
a
way,
sec.
Which, by the way,
he did contemplate retirement.
Bullshit. Okay, he contemplated retirement. He said that. You know why he said that? Because he told the Packers that, and they bent over. Okay, and so we wanted to just make sure that he gave him that piece. It's November 2nd, so they will have played 8 games at that point, 9 games. Mm-hmm. Okay, what's the worst record they could have at that point?
I mean, anything can happen, but like, so I mean, I guess they start with Saints. Yeah, it's not going to be that bad.
Say and whatever.
It's not going to be that bad, but they do face. Yeah, I mean, but
they're
my
going for it this year.
Yeah.
I think it's more likely that if they have a bad start, which is a mediocre start by most teams, calculus, they will actually be a buyer. Because Aaron Rodgers is going to be like, you know what the missing piece was? Jordy Nelson. Yeah. Actually, Julius Peppers could really help out our D-line.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the issue is
Charles Woodson still running around in his backyard? Can we get him over here?
The NFC probably won't be that good, so they will be buyers. But if I'm in the Packers front office, I'm spending this entire year. I'm not even watching the games. I'm planning for the future, because like what Aaron Rodgers did was basically hold you hostage and say the 2021 season is not in your hands. The 2021 season is in Aaron Rodgers' hands. And so if I'm in the Packers front office, like I'm basically writing off 2021 as gravy. Like that's the only way you can view it, right? Because you're not going to be able to do anything that's not going to piss off the quarterback, right? And you're not going to be able and your future is not all that bright because you're getting rid of him after the season. So your plan is to like figure out the best way to accumulate assets starting, Feb 10, right? Like that's sort of how I'm thinking. So if they're like if they're anywhere close to in the tank, I do have to think like it's probably because Aaron didn't play that well, and you sort of like look at him like the meme and be like, and trade away some players. I don't think it'll happen, but I think there's probably a 5% chance they're not very good this year.
I think the big question here, the one actionable piece of information. All right, you have Devontae Adams in a contract year. His franchise tag will be $20 million if you go ahead and do that. And you probably wouldn't want to tag him and extend him. You probably want to trade him anyway. It's Halloween. You're 3-5 or 3-6. I agree with you. They'll probably be buyers. But are you taking calls on Devontae Adams and at least entertaining the idea?
So that then you can cut Rodgers or trade. You basically
you get rid of Rodgers. You don't pay Adams. You get a first round pick for Adams. Maybe trade. I mean, just go nuts.
You just. I mean, that would be the funny thing is, Brian Gutekunst today had his mouth taped up and his hands behind his back while he was watching the press conference. So like, I don't know that he could actually say the things he wanted to say. Maybe his eyes were duct taped closed so he couldn't even cry. But that would be the ultimate retribution, right? Would be to say, oh, Aaron, we gave you everything and you couldn't fucking get it done. Well, guess what, buddy? This is going to be the most miserable last season. The Last Dance? Yeah, buddy, they pulled the fucking plug in the DJ booth before you could fucking even get into your moves. All right, buddy? Like, good night. That would be incredible.
But these are things that could happen, right?
Can you imagine, like, get up in the morning? Greenberg wouldn't be able to sleep. Mike Greenberg, especially if the Cowboys are decent, Mike Greenberg is just going to be there in the morning, like, trying to decide whether to open up with the Packers or the Cowboys every morning. It's going to be amazing.
I mean, we're a show that talks about, like, ranges of outcomes. That's in the range of outcomes.
That would be incredible.
I mean, we're talking about a team that just, like, before LaFleur had 2 straight losing seasons, and one of them Rodgers played in every game. He played hurt, but he's been injured before. Like, there's a ton of this is interesting. Like,
that would be such a bummer for the people holding 35-1 Packers tickets who are just rolling. And
I thought you were gonna say Packers stock, like Mike's mom Mike.
Let's do this real quick. Let's go around the horn. Where does Aaron Rodgers play football in 2022, 2023? Brad, I'll let you go first.
I'm going to go with Denver. Probably an easy call. But they have the precedent. They took Peyton Manning in to finish out his career. The roster is just so good at every position except for quarterback. And I think he really wants to be there. I think they found a way to get it done.
I think it's going to be Las Vegas.
Wow.
I think so. I'm bullish on the Raiders this year, but I can totally see it going pear-shaped. And if you're Gruden and you're 4 years in, you haven't had a winning record yet, like, I mean, it's either your ass or Rodgers, like.
Yeah. If the Niners
aren't doing it, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. It'd be very interesting to see if Trey Lance played poorly, what they would do.
Does Trey Lance play at all this year is the question. Like,
oh, buddy.
I mean,
if he doesn't play at all this year, I think that's the same thing. Like, if he can't,
I would say it's the worst trade ever if he doesn't play this year.
Yeah,
one of the worst trades ever.
Yeah. If he doesn't play this year, that means he was absolutely god awful terrible. Okay, that's what it means, and they are going after Rodgers. I'm gonna go with Denver as well. I sneakily kind of hope that the Packers win the Super Bowl, not just because I bet them, but it's because I bet them. But I do agree, Denver makes the most sense. I just think it'll be very interesting how he ends up getting there. Let's talk quickly about the Randall Cobb trade because, Brad, you were saying how this was like the worst trade you've seen in a really long time. Talk us through the trade and the absurdity of it.
Yeah, it starts with the contract he got from Houston is one of the final moves of the great B.O.B., and it was one of the worst contracts I've ever seen. It was in our article for worst contracts in the NFL. It was prominently featured in that article. I mean, you give a guy like a 30-year-old slot receiver a 3-year, $27 million deal with, I want to say, 19 or 20 million of that guaranteed. Just an insane signing. And so this year he had an $8.25 million fully guaranteed base salary. So Green Bay's taking on $5.25 million of that. Green Bay is in one of the worst salary cap situations in the NFL. For next year, they're already projected to be $35 million over the salary cap. That's without Devontae Adams under contract. And so it's just an awful. Like, if I was good at cuts, I was like, all right, what is the one thing you want me to do? This is probably the last thing on the list that I would have hoped Aaron Rodgers would have asked for. I would have rather called up Jordy Nelson or Bubba Franks. I would have called a lot of people before I called
Bubba Franks would have been incredible. Oh man, Jermichael Finley, where is he?
I would have at least brought back Cedric Benson.
Donald Driver?
We get Donald call Eddie Lacy in a hard
cut. Yeah, Eddie Lacy could play guard for them. Actually, he's lost a lot of weight.
He's trim now.
Yeah, he's lost a lot of weight.
Eddie Lacy could rush for 1,000 yards in the NFL tomorrow.
That's
the hottest take we've ever had.
At the same time, the Texans still get fleeced. Like a team like comes to like this is like you're a lemonade stand and in the middle of a desert and you just like
how did that phone call go? So Nick Casario picks up the phone. It's Gutekunst. Gutekunst is sitting there. By the way, Aaron Rodgers is standing behind him with a gun to his head. Right? Yeah. Okay. Gutekunst sitting there. Mike Murphy's in the corner squirming. And Gutekunst is like, so, is Randall Cobb available? And Casario's like sitting there, and he like he puts his hand over the phone. He's like, guys, what the fuck is going on? Why do they want Randall?
Like he freezes and only gets a 6.
Why do they want Randall Cobb? Is this a bigger play? Like, what are we not seeing here? And they like can't come to the conclusion that it's Aaron Rodgers behind there, like orchestrating the whole thing. And they're like, I guess.
Pretend like he's valuable. Pretend like we love him. Like, I don't know. If he's really, he's doing well here. I don't know.
He's
really
when
you spent the last like 6 months in like a Bible study, you like miss out on like that you are supposed to be in the world but not of it, and like they're maybe just not listening to.
Okay, so here's my
news.
counterpoint. And Brad, you have been, you've advised for like you get this whole that dynamic as you've just explained earlier with like some of the Xavier Howard stuff. My take is this: they called him up and they said, look, we have to get Randall Cobb for A-Rod. We don't want to give the appearance that we got completely fleeced. We'll do a good deal for you, and like down the road, like if you need something, we'll be there to like make a trade happen so that you can make another trade, or like like there was some other thing that was said or agreed upon that's not a part of the trade that we don't know about.
I actually love that you mentioned this. I've had a conspiracy theory for a couple of years. It has to do with your 49ers.
Oh,
yeah. I think when the Niners traded for Jimmy Garoppolo and all they sent was a second, and yes, I know maybe you could say all they got. The guy hasn't played yet. But look, he was considered a franchise quarterback. You give him a huge deal. All they sent was a second-round pick. I think the subsequent Trent Brown trade, which I think off the top of my head was like a 5th or a 6th for a solid tackle who just had a good season in San Fran. I think those two deals were part of the same deal. I do not think those deals were in isolation. I think they were related to each other. And I think that was kind of San Fran paying back the favor to New England. So Caserio was there for that. I think that is a very good theory. I could see a situation where we see a trade down the road where we're like, yo, Green Bay just kind of got killed by Caserio in this deal. And in the back of your mind, you should think, yeah, because Caserio agreed to eat $3 million for a 6th-round pick for Randall Cobb. Like he kind of had an IOU with Gutekunst or Rodgers or whoever's calling the shots in Green Bay.
I love that. I was standing at the wall. I've got like pictures of things. I've got string. I've got
you're Dale from Horrible Bosses.
Yes,
too.
I'm Dale from Horrible Bosses too. And Brad walked in and pointed to like the one thing I hadn't considered, and like all of a sudden the picture was clear for me. I think that is Nick Caserio having seen, Bill Belichick and like the Patriots way makes it even more likely that this was the case. And now maybe the Texans will find a way to win like more than 3 games at some point over the next 5 years. You never know. Could happen. What would be interesting if
I'm not confident. They got rid of Dante Moncrief. Like I feel like that was the engine. It was going to be the engine.
Okay, so we've exhausted the Green Bay stuff. I do feel like we could talk about it for a while. I'm sure we'll revisit it at some point here. I am curious a little bit, Brad. We haven't talked a lot about Deshaun Watson at all, and it wasn't even something that we were considering talking about. We were just talking about the Texans, and we're not going to get into like the allegations, which are absolutely fucking horrible, and I can't believe teams are like even considering trading for him. But I am curious, how do you think this actually plays out this year?
Another fascinating question. It's honestly very bizarre that we're still at a point where there isn't a resolution insofar as like him getting on the commissioner's exempt list. I mean, the one example I can think of, like Zeke Elliott, before there was even there was no resolution from a legal standpoint. He got placed on the list like pretty early on in the process. The NFL had done their own info gathering and fact gathering, and they kind of have like their own court. Goodell is kind of the judge, jury, and executioner a little bit there. So I don't understand how he's like, the fact he's showing up to practice and like rocking a hoodie and running routes and playing safety is like bizarre to me. If I was him, I also probably wouldn't. I would just be in the training room saying I had back spasms. But anyways, like I don't see how a team trades for him without resolution unless you basically like, hey, I'll send you like a 2nd and a 5th. And you're just like, hey, look, we're literally just throwing anything, not a first-round pick. And look, he might never play football again, but it's worth it just because like there's a 5% chance he gets cleared and we have Deshaun Watson. But these articles about like the 5 first-round picks and these old deals we heard about, there's no chance any GM is even considering that as of today.
I want to think that's true.
And then you see the Eagles and you realize anything's possible.
Yeah. I really hope that that's true. I do think that the hardest part of this whole thing is like how utterly unprepared the league was for this to happen. Like we've seen this happen a lot. Like the Adrian Peterson thing happened, and it was like, what do we do here? And then like the Ray Rice thing, it was like 2 games, and then we saw the video, and then it was like indefinite, which like is probably the harshest punishment the league has ever given a player, even though like it was among terrible incidents, probably a median incident. And then now we have this, and it's like we just thought it was going to resolve itself. But in reality, it was probably this required the most action, because he's like literally on the open market for a trade, and there are teams there is an edge to having like no moral compass. It sounds stupid to say, but like a team that's like, wait, that's the wrong thing to do, is like, well, there's going to be another team that's like, well, is it? And like every once in a while, you luck out in those situations. Does that make it right? No. And the league should step in and be like, this is not happening this year. This man is accused of 20 plus whatevers, and we're going to pause and to quote a former president, see what's going on here.
Yeah, that's the part that I don't understand, Brad, is it feels to me like players have been put on the commissioner's exempt list for way less.
No, 100%. That's my perception as well. And I think it's part of it is because like there hasn't been a lot of criminal proceedings, there's been a lot of civil. And I think a lot of it just hasn't been able to be shared with the NFL yet. So they haven't seen as much. Whereas in other instances, I guess they've been able to get their hands on more information. But yeah, I don't know how they didn't think through it. They had a lot of time to prepare for this and figure this out. It's also, strangely enough, it's kind of tied to the new CBA where guys can't hold out anymore. So there's also, look, no one's really sympathetic or really at the moment cares a lot about Deshaun Watson and his pockets. But like, it's also unfair to be like, hey, like, you can hold out and lose $50,000 every day, even though, you're presumed innocent until guilty. Like, so he kind of has to be there. Whereas I would say in the old CBA, they would just be like, hey, look, just don't show up. You're going to get fined, but we're allowed to waive the fines. The new CBA, they cannot waive the fines. So like, they kind of like dug their own grave there a little bit. Yeah, it is crazy. And I kind of do agree with Eric. I think some teams probably are like, winning cures all ailments, and like people will get over it if we win some games. And that probably is the conversation happening in 15 buildings.
Imagine explaining to your wife, like, yeah, we just traded 4 first-round picks for a guy that all you have to do, by the way, to put him on the commissioner's exempt list is go, yeah, he DM'd 80 massage therapists. Yeah, I'm gonna need you. I'm gonna need to know more until I let you like anywhere near a facility.
There was somebody that I know within a team. I'm not gonna say who, but they were like, they texted me like the day out, and like I had to make light of any of this, but they texted me and they said our quarterback has 1 massage therapist. Like it's not like. This is fishy as hell. Even if he somehow threads the needle and wasn't actually doing anything wrong.
I'm sorry, but like the idea,
it's a lack of judgment that is immense.
The number like 80 is all you need to hear there. You don't need like there isn't. But anyways,
yeah, but there's also like, and I don't. This is difficult because we as a company, we've taken you as the leadership there have taken a great pains to report things. And I do think it's good to recognize that this is not normal, and to report it as if it's normal is probably triggering to people who have been victims of sexual assault and things like that. And so like it is important to say this is not normal. I don't understand what the league is doing here, and hopefully it gets resolved soon, because the facts of the matter is he's one of the best quarterbacks in football, but this is not a thing that adults have to resolve this, right?
By the way, saying that he should be put on the commissioner's exempt list is not saying that he should be thrown in max security jail.
Yeah, like football is a privilege. Like, it's not
there's a ton of stuff to get to, and I want to get to a few more things, Brad, and kind of like a rapid-ish fire round here. This has been talked about a little bit. Trey Lance did sign his guaranteed, I think, $22.1 million. So Zach Wilson is the only quarterback that hasn't signed. He also plays for the Jets, who have like the funniest quarterback room of all time. It's like Josh Johnson and Sean Mannion or something like that. So it would seem that they would be very intent on getting him signed. Why has he not signed?
The funny thing is those two guys are guys they might bring in, and they actually have more experience than the guys they do have in the building, which is Mike White and James Morgan, who neither have taken an NFL snap. But yeah,
same difference.
So he's now the last unsigned. He's now the last unsigned draft pick in the entire class. It essentially comes down to establishing contractual precedents, and the big one here is offset language. Not to go on a long rant about what that means, but essentially, if you have guarantees in a contract and the club terminates that deal early, if the guy signs elsewhere and has guarantees in that new contract and that other deal, it offsets against the original clubs and they actually no longer owe that player any money. Players obviously don't want the language. They can do what's called double dipping, where they essentially get both payments. And clubs, they obviously want to get that in there. And so it looks silly because you're not going to cut Zach Wilson before this deal's over. I mean, you just saw the worst case outcome with Sam Darnold of what could happen with this pick, and he still got you a second round pick and had his 5th-year option picked up. So you're not going to do it. It's more about when he signs his potential second contract in New York, you can say we had offset language last time, so we want offset language again. That's what it's about. I do think it's kind of absurd at this point, though. You have the worst quarterback room, outside of him in the NFL. Training camp has started. He's the only rookie not in across the league, not there. I mean, he's the interesting thing too. Last comment is the agent actually also represented Joey Bosa when he went through a similar thing with the Chargers. So he's done this before. He knows it. I think, in my opinion, they have more leverage here. New York is going to start to look really bad if they haven't already.
Yeah, that's interesting where the leverage lies, because it certainly lies with the quarterback, but also, like, I can't imagine, Brad, that like there isn't a fairly standard offset language, like at least within a bound, right? Like there's probably a middle, standard, a couple standard deviations away from the mean. And like within that range, it's probably not that big of a deal, right? And so the thing that I think is so weird about this is, as Zach Wilson, first off, you look like you're 14 and you should be doing TikTok videos, and you're going to come in and run a team in New York. Like I would have fucking been there. I would have been camping out for training camp, like to try and show that I was ready to lead this goddamn team. And like worrying about what would happen if I got fucking cut as the number 2 pick is the biggest pansy move of all time. But then on the other side of things, it's like, how do you tell your agent who you just signed to like represent you? And he was probably like, this is my deal. This is what I do. I'm going to get you the best thing possible. You're probably like, I'm 22 years old. Like, what do I do here?
Yeah, great point. Great point. This thing is the team might say, look, eventually he'll fold. He'll want to be here. Like you said, he's got to handle New York media. I will say, living out in New York, like I always, as a contract guy, even though for whatever reason people think I'm like pro team and I'm like a pro, suppressing wages guy, I always get saddened. You are, yeah. I always get saddened to see that like fans often side with the owner and are like, this player. I have seen the opposite. I think maybe it's because the Jets have zero credibility, as they deserve zero credibility. But like, I think at this point the fans are like, just give the kid whatever he wants in this deal so he can show up. Like you said, he weighs 160 pounds soaking wet. Like, let him in the building so he can figure out how to play football at the NFL level. But yeah, someone's gonna blink eventually. I'll say though, Trey Lance, real quick. Trey Lance got offset language in his deal, so he had to succumb and just showed up and did not get that. So, every team's different about it. Trevor Lawrence, no offsets at the first overall pick. So it is kind of more club to club. It's actually not that standard across the league.
We expect Darius Leonard to get extended. The other kind of big ones are Lamar, Josh Allen, Baker Mayfield. I guess Nick Chubb was a guy that we were talking about that you brought up beforehand. But like, are there any other extensions that we see before the season starts?
Yeah, some of these 2018 first-round guys, like Quentin Nelson, could come through. I think maybe like if the receivers, you explore maybe a Calvin Ridley in Atlanta now that you moved on from Julio, maybe a DJ Moore in Carolina now that you kind of moved on from some of the guys that old regime. And then kind of a less sexy name, but I think it's interesting in this right tackle market. Eric's Vikings and Brian O'Neill, the right tackle there. I think it's an interesting situation because Ryan Ramczyk kind of blew that market out of the water. We saw today Braden Smith in Indianapolis kind of followed suit. And so that market has been totally reset, and it looks like some good news for Brian O'Neill in Minnesota.
Lucky. Merry Christmas. You're about to go on vacation. You get some great news there.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you go 1 for 10 drafting offensive linemen in the last decade, you better pay that. You better pay the one that hold that trophy up.
We always give our guests an opportunity to give a recommendation, as we do every Sunday, and a recommendation for the people. Brad, it can be anything, honestly. We've done podcasts, we've done recipes, we've done places to eat, we've done mechanisms for working better. We've heard the whole gamut. So I'm excited to hear a recommendation from you.
Wow, that's totally catching me off guard. This is a bit of a random one, but it's the only thing that's coming to mind. Once you do feel safe and comfortable traveling and you have the ability to do so, I'm going to recommend you go to beautiful New Orleans down in Louisiana. Maybe go catch a game. I think it's the craziest atmosphere for a professional sport I've ever seen. Obviously, no longer the Drew Brees era down there, but go spend money, be a tourist in New Orleans, help restore that economy down there, and eat the best food you've ever eaten in your entire life.
As somebody who, prior to becoming co-workers with Brad, partied with Brad on the Tulane. It's not even – so that's the interesting thing, Brad. You went to law school in Tulane. Tulane's got, like one bar on campus, but it's like – but you sort of like still get to go – like you have the downtown and everything. It's very much like it's a fun city to go to college in, but it's not a college city in a weird way.
Yeah, 100%.
I feel like,
which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah. I feel like Frenchman is really underrated. Like I've always like the trumpets and the music and everything in the background is magical, I would say. So good a recommendation, Brad.
What's if I had to go to one restaurant in New Orleans, where should I go?
That's a good question. I know we're not going to too long. What kind of food? Any preference or?
I'll eat anything that's good.
Stop. Yeah, good. Okay.
Yeah, anything that's good. Like I'm not fucking. Yeah, you know me.
I mean, you got to go to Commander's Palace if you're going to pick one. In Uptown, it is the best brunch you'll ever have in your entire life, but also a good dinner. And the cocktails are magical as well. It's probably one of the best restaurants in the world.
That's the type of recommendation I'm looking for. Brad Spielberger, we always enjoy it. We're going to need to make you more of a regular occurrence on the PFF Forecast. Brad has been doing tremendous work, a lot of which you actually don't see his name tied to. My guy is just grinding. Absolutely a key part of all of the great stuff that
really
PFF
opened
does.
up the number of things we can talk intelligently about, I would say. Like a very and
this podcast is a good example of that, which was a blast. Brad, thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon, buddy. Special thanks to Brad for joining us, and to you, Eric, for making the reads funny. I don't know if people actually listen to the reads, but they should start just for that incredible performance. We'll be back on Sunday. We're actually going to be recording that podcast here in just a couple of minutes. We have a great one coming up for you on Sunday. We appreciate you all. Love you. Peace out.